In exactly 24 hours, Robert Mitchell's life would be completely unrecognizable. But at midnight on December 18, 1995, huddled over a steam grate trying not to freeze to death, Bobby had no idea that transformation was coming. He couldn't have imagined that in 12 hours, he'd be sitting in a luxury hotel room, clean for the first time in months, wearing clothes that actually fit, eating a hot meal at a table instead of scraps from a dumpster. He couldn't have dreamed that in 18 hours, a private investigator would locate the daughter he hadn't seen in 15 years. He couldn't have conceived that in 24 hours, he'd be holding his daughter again, crying tears of joy instead of despair, being given not just a room for one night, but an apartment for 6 months, not just a meal, but a job, not just charity, but genuine dignity, all because Michael Jackson refused to keep walking, all because one of the most famous people in the world stopped, looked at someone the world had decided was invisible, and said, "I see you, and you matter." What happened in those 24 hours wasn't just charity. It was a masterclass in what real power looks like when it chooses compassion over convenience, when it chooses to see instead of walking past, when it understands that the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money. It's proving to them that they haven't been forgotten, that they still deserve dignity, that they're still human. Michael Jackson gave Bobby Mitchell thousands of dollars that night, but what he really gave him was something infinitely more valuable: his life back, his family back, his humanity back. And it all started with a simple decision to stop walking. To understand how extraordinary what happened was, we need to understand who Bobby Mitchell used to be and how far he'd fallen. Robert James Mitchell was born on July 4th, 1943, in a small town in Ohio. His birthday, Independence Day, seemed prophetic to his parents, who believed their son was destined for something meaningful. They were right, though not in the way they'd hoped. Bobby enlisted in the Army in 1971, at age 28, older than most recruits, but determined to serve his country during the Vietnam War. He was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division and deployed to Vietnam in early 1972. What he experienced there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Bobby saw combat, real combat, the kind that newspapers wrote about, but could never truly capture. He saw friends die. He saw villages destroyed. He saw things that no human being should have to see. Things that burned themselves into his mind so deeply that even decades later, he couldn't close his eyes without seeing them again. But Bobby was also a hero. On March 15, 1973, his platoon was ambushed during a routine patrol. Bobby, despite being wounded himself, carried 3 injured soldiers to safety under heavy enemy fire. He saved their lives. For this action, he was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, one of the military's highest honors for bravery in combat. When Bobby returned to the United States in 1975, he was 32 years old and carrying wounds that nobody could see. PTSD wasn't well understood then. Veterans were expected to just get over it and return to normal life. Bobby tried. He really tried. He got a job at a manufacturing plant in Ohio, married his high school sweetheart Linda, who'd waited for him. They had a daughter, Sarah, born in 1967 while Bobby was overseas. For a few years, it almost worked. Bobby went to work, came home, kissed his wife, played with his daughter, and pretended the nightmares weren't destroying him from the inside. But PTSD doesn't just go away because you ignore it. The nightmares got worse. Bobby started drinking to sleep, then drinking to get through the day, then drinking to forget. By 1980, he'd lost his job. By 1982, Linda had filed for divorce, taking 15-year-old Sarah with her. Bobby couldn't blame her. He'd become someone unrecognizable even to himself. The next 13 years were a slow descent into homelessness. Bobby drifted from town to town, taking odd jobs when he could, living in shelters when they had space, sleeping on the streets when they didn't. By 1993, he'd ended up in New York City, because at least in New York, you could be invisible. In a city of 8 million people, one more homeless veteran was easy to overlook. For the past 3 years, Bobby had been living on the streets of Manhattan, his spot, the place he returned to every night. was the steam grate outside the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue. The location was ironic. One of the most expensive hotels in the world, catering to billionaires and celebrities, and 3 feet from its golden doors, a decorated war veteran was trying not to freeze to death. Bobby had learned the rhythms of that steam grate. He knew when the subway trains below would cause bursts of warm air to rise through the metal grating. He knew how to position himself to catch the maximum heat. He knew which security guards would leave him alone, and which would move him along. But December 18th, 1995, was different. The weather forecast had been warning of a major snowstorm for 3 days, and by midnight, Manhattan was buried. 8 inches of snow had fallen, with wind chills making it feel like 0 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't discomfort. This was life-threatening cold. Bobby was wearing every piece of clothing he owned: 2 pairs of torn pants, 3 shirts, a donated sweater with holes, and over it all, his old military jacket from Vietnam. The jacket was olive green, faded to almost gray, with his name still stitched over the breast pocket. Mitchell. It had a bronze star medal pinned to it. Though most people who saw Bobby assumed he'd stolen it from a thrift store, nobody believed a homeless man could be a decorated war hero. By midnight, Bobby's fingers were numb. His feet had stopped hurting an hour earlier, which terrified him because he knew that meant frostbite was setting in. He'd wrapped his hands in plastic bags he'd found in a dumpster, trying to preserve what little warmth remained. His beard, once neatly trimmed during his military days, now wild and gray, was crusted with ice from his frozen breath. Bobby had accepted that this might be his last night. The thought wasn't as frightening as it should have been. Part of him was tired of being cold, tired of being hungry, tired of being invisible. Maybe it would be easier to just let the cold take him. At least then, the nightmares would stop. He thought about Sarah, his daughter. She'd be 28 now, probably married, maybe had kids of her own. Bobby hoped she'd had a good life, hoped she didn't remember him the way he'd been at the end of the marriage. Drunk, angry, broken. He hoped she remembered the father who used to push her on swings and read her bedtime stories, back before Vietnam changed him into someone else. "I'm sorry, baby girl," Bobby whispered into the wind, his words disappearing into the storm. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough." At 12:47 a.m., the golden doors of the Plaza Hotel opened. Bobby didn't look up. He'd learned not to make eye contact with the hotel guests. They didn't like being reminded that poverty existed 3 feet from their luxury. Most people walked past him so fast they were almost running, as if homelessness might be contagious. But this person didn't rush past. Bobby heard footsteps stop, felt someone looking at him, still didn't look up. Looking up just invited confrontation. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was soft, gentle. "Are you okay?" Bobby looked up slowly. The man standing in front of him was wearing a black jacket, black fedora pulled low, sunglasses even though it was midnight. Even through his cold-addled brain, Bobby recognized something familiar about him, though he couldn't place it. Bobby didn't follow music or pop culture anymore, hadn't for years. "I'm fine," Bobby said automatically. The answer everyone wanted, the answer that meant "don't worry about me, keep walking." But the man didn't keep walking. Instead, he did something Bobby hadn't seen anyone do in 3 years. He sat down, right there on the snowy sidewalk, right next to Bobby, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's cold tonight," the man said. Bobby almost laughed. That was an understatement. "Yeah, it is." "How long have you been out here?" Bobby shrugged. "Few hours tonight." 3 years total." The man was quiet for a moment, and Bobby could feel him really looking. Not the quick glance most people gave before hurrying past. Real looking, seeing. "That's a military jacket," the man said. "Were you in the service?" Bobby nodded. "Vietnam, 101st Airborne, long time ago." "Thank you for your service." The man's voice cracked slightly when he said it, and Bobby heard genuine emotion. Not the polite, automatic "thank you for your service" that people said without thinking. This was real. Suddenly, Bobby felt something break inside him. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the first genuine human kindness he'd experienced in years. But tears started streaming down his face, freezing in his beard. "I'm sorry," Bobby said, trying to wipe his eyes with his plastic bag-covered hands. "I'm sorry. It's been a long time since anyone." "Don't apologize," the man said gently. He pulled off his own gloves, expensive leather gloves that probably cost more than Bobby had seen in months, and handed them to Bobby. "Here, put these on." "I can't take your please." "Put them on." Bobby did. The gloves were warm from the man's hands, and the feeling of warmth on his frozen fingers almost made Bobby cry harder. They sat there in the snow for 15 minutes, just talking. The man asked Bobby about Vietnam, about his family, about how he ended up on the streets. Bobby, for the first time in years, told the truth about the PTSD, about the drinking, about losing everything, about his daughter Sarah, who he hadn't seen in 15 years and probably hated him. The man listened to everything, really listened, and when Bobby finished, the man said something that Bobby would remember for the rest of his life. "You're not invisible, and you're not forgotten, and tonight, that's going to change." That's when Bobby finally recognized who he was talking to, even with the sunglasses and fedora. Even though Bobby hadn't listened to music in decades, something clicked. You're Michael Jackson." Michael smiled. "Yeah, and you're Bobby Mitchell, and right now you're coming inside with me." What happened next was something Bobby's cold-numbed brain couldn't quite process. Michael Jackson stood up, helped Bobby to his feet, and walked him toward the golden doors of the Plaza Hotel. "Mr. Jackson," a security guard rushed forward. "Sir, you can't." "He's with me," Michael said firmly. "But hotel policy. He's my guest, and right now, we're going inside." The lobby of the Plaza Hotel was like something from another world. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, warmth that felt like heaven after hours in the freezing cold. Bobby stood there, dripping melting snow onto the expensive carpet, feeling completely out of place. Every person in the lobby was staring at him. He could see the disgust on some faces, the confusion on others, the fear on a few. A man in an expensive suit rushed over. The hotel manager, Richard Sullivan, who'd been managing the plaza for 20 years and had never faced a situation quite like this. "Mr. Jackson, I need to speak with you, privately." Michael and Richard stepped aside. Bobby couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see Richard's expression growing more tense, Michael's expression growing more determined. The conversation lasted nearly 5 minutes, Richard gesturing toward Bobby, toward the door, clearly trying to explain why this couldn't happen. But Michael stood his ground, arms crossed, speaking quietly but with absolute authority. Finally, Michael said something that made Richard's face go pale. Michael walked back to Bobby. "They're preparing a room for you." "Mr. Jackson, I can't accept, Bobby." Michael put his hand on Bobby's shoulder. "When I was a kid, my family had nothing. We lived in a tiny house in Gary, Indiana. 9 people in 2 bedrooms. My father was hard on us, too hard, but he worked every day to keep us fed. I remember what it feels like when the world treats you like you don't matter, and I remember the people who saw us anyway, who helped us anyway. Tonight, I'm paying that forward, okay?" Bobby could only nod, tears streaming down his face again. The hotel staff prepared a suite on the 12th floor, not just any room. A luxury suite with a king bed, marble bathroom, sitting area. Bobby stood in the doorway, unable to move. This couldn't be real. "The bathroom is through there," Michael said gently. "Why don't you take a hot shower, get warm? I'll have food sent up, and clothes." Within an hour, Bobby had showered for the first time in months. The hot water felt like a miracle. He scrubbed away layers of dirt and grime, watched them swirl down the drain. When he finally emerged, wrapped in the hotel's plush bathrobe, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. A Plaza staff member had delivered bags of new clothes while he was showering, jeans that actually fit, a warm flannel shirt, a heavy winter jacket, socks, underwear, boots, everything he needed. Room service brought food, real food, a steak dinner with vegetables, mashed potatoes, fresh bread. Bobby sat at the table and ate slowly, trying not to cry at the taste of a hot meal eaten with real silverware at a real table. Michael stayed with him for 2 hours, just talking about life, about music, about war and trauma and healing. Michael told Bobby about his own struggles with insomnia, with feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people. "We're not that different, you and me," Michael said. "We're both fighting battles nobody else can see. The difference is, I have resources to help with mine, but you deserve those resources too." At 3 a.m., Michael finally stood to leave. Bobby stood too, overwhelmed with gratitude he didn't have words for. "Get some sleep," Michael said. "Real sleep. You're safe here." "Mr. Jackson, I don't know how to thank you." "Bobby," Michael smiled. "You already thanked me by trusting me enough to come inside. That's all I needed." After Michael left, Bobby stood at the window of his suite, looking out at the snow-covered city. Somewhere out there was the steam grate where he'd been freezing just hours ago. It seemed impossible that he was now standing in luxury. Warm, clean, fed. Bobby slept that night in a real bed for the first time in 3 years. No nightmares came, just deep, dreamless sleep. When Bobby woke at 10 a.m., he found a note slipped under his door. "Bobby, stay as long as you need. I've taken care of everything with the hotel. Today, someone will be coming to talk with you about some additional things. Trust them." Meant cut. At noon, there was a knock on Bobby's door. A woman in professional attire introduced herself as Rachel, Michael Jackson's personal assistant. Behind her was a man in a suit who introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Chen, a physician who specialized in veteran care. Chen's examination revealed what Bobby had suspected: early-stage frostbite in his toes, malnutrition, untreated dental problems, and severe PTSD that had never been properly addressed. The doctor was kind, thorough, and non-judgmental. After the doctor left, Rachel sat down with Bobby. "Bobby, Michael asked me to talk with you about something sensitive. You mentioned last night that you have a daughter named Sarah, that you haven't seen her in 15 years. Bobby's heart clenched. "Yeah, Sarah. I don't even know where she is. Probably hates me." Rachel smiled gently. "Michael hired a private investigator this morning. We found her." Bobby felt the world tilt. "You? What?" "Sarah Mitchell. She's 28 years old. She's a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Bobby, she's been looking for you." The tears came then, great heaving sobs. All these years, he'd assumed Sarah had written him off as a failure. "We spoke with her this morning," Rachel continued. "She wants to see you. If you want to see her." "Of course I want to see her," Bobby choked out. "She's my daughter. She's everything. Her flight lands at 4 p.m. She'll be here by 5. Bobby spent the next hours in shock. The hotel barber came and trimmed Bobby's beard, cut his hair. It was strange seeing his own face emerge from behind months of growth. At 4:47 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Bobby's hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the handle. He opened the door. Sarah stood there. She was 28 now, a grown woman, but Bobby would have recognized her anywhere. She had her mother's eyes but his nose. For a moment, they just stared at each other. 15 years of separation. 15 years of pain and regret. All of it hanging in the air between them. Then Sarah whispered, "Daddy?" Bobby broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry I let you down." Sarah closed the distance and wrapped her arms around her father.
"I'm just glad you're alive. I thought I'd lost you forever. I looked for you for years."
They held each other in the doorway, crying together, finding each other again. Michael Jackson arrived an hour later. He'd given them time alone. When Bobby answered the door, Sarah was sitting beside him, holding his hand. "Mr. Jackson," Bobby said, voice thick with emotion. "What you've done for me, finding my daughter. You gave me my life back." Michael shook his head. "You did the hard part, Bobby. You survived. All I did was open a door." Before Michael left, he handed Bobby an envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000 and a letter. "Bobby," Michael said, "that money is for you. Get your teeth fixed, get therapy, get an apartment, get back on your feet. But this is important. You're not a charity case. You're a human being who deserves dignity." Bobby hugged Michael tightly, tears soaking into his jacket. 6 months later, Bobby Mitchell was living in a modest apartment in Queens. He'd completed a 3-month PTSD treatment program. He'd gotten his teeth fixed. He was working part-time at a veterans support center. He was sober, truly sober for the first time in years. Sarah visited every other weekend. They were slowly rebuilding their relationship. Bobby wrote Michael Jackson a letter. "Dear Michael, I'm not good with words, but I need to tell you what you did for me. You didn't just give me money or a hotel room. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. My humanity. For 3 years, I was invisible. You looked at me and saw a person. You sat down in the snow when you could have kept walking. You found my daughter when I'd given up hope. You gave me a chance to be a father again. You saved my life not by giving me money, but by seeing me when I was invisible. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to pass that forward. With gratitude, Bobby Mitchell." On June 25, 2009, when news broke that Michael Jackson had died, Bobby was at work at the Veterans Center. He heard the announcement and had to sit down, overcome with grief. At Michael's memorial service, a reporter found Bobby and asked him to share his story. "Michael Jackson saved my life," Bobby said. "Not because he was rich or famous. He saved my life because he stopped walking. When everyone made me invisible, he chose to see me. He gave me dignity. Then he gave me back my daughter." That's who Michael Jackson was when cameras weren't rolling. Bobby lived another 15 years. He continued working with veterans, using his story to show that recovery was possible. When Bobby Mitchell died in 2024 at age 81, his daughter Sarah made sure his obituary mentioned that in December 1995, Michael Jackson had stopped walking, had sat in the snow with a homeless veteran, had given Bobby his life back. At Bobby's funeral, Sarah shared one final story. In Bobby's belongings, she'd found the leather gloves Michael had given him that night in 1995. Bobby had kept them for 29 years, never worn them again, just kept them as a reminder that he'd been seen, that he'd mattered. The story of Michael Jackson and Bobby Mitchell is a reminder that real power isn't about fame or wealth. Real power is choosing to see when everyone else walks past. December 18th, a snowstorm in Manhattan. A homeless veteran, freezing on a steam grate. A superstar who refused to keep walking. In 24 hours, that proved grace is more powerful than indifference. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply stop, look, and see.